Please welcome to the show, Jenna Ellis is a senior legal advisor to Team Trump and attorney to President Donald Trump. She's a constitutional law attorney, and she's senior fellow at Falkirk Center at Liberty University, and She joins us now. Good evening, Mrs. Ellis.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. It's an honor to have you. And I guess we have to start with night 3 here of the the Democratic National Convention. And
watch it.
Yeah, you know, I think the Democrats have done an amazing thing here, and I'm being serious. They've taken a sitting president and somehow managed to make him look like a total outsider once again by dreading up from Carter to Clinton to Biden to Kerry. It's like Democrats' world for the last 40 years. They've made the president once again go in looking like a total outsider.
Yeah, and they've also really undermined their own position here because, having someone like Bill Clinton speak out and his remarks were just completely lacking self-awareness. For him to say that somehow the Oval Office should just be, the command center when, I'm old enough to remember what was going on during his presidency. But then to have someone like him and his positions on things like abortion, where, safe, legal, and rare. Now you're looking at the contrast of the extremes, even between the Democrats' own party. And so they're actually evidencing their own identity crisis going into this infomercial. So I don't think they're really handling it that well.
Yeah, there seems to be an identity crisis in more than one way, what you just described. And then there's also this we're hearing Joe talk about buy American all of a sudden. We're like pro-American. It's like I always say, they love to wrap themselves in the Constitution when it fits their narrative, but most of the time their policies and everything else they do are trying to tear it down. So they play this buy American, we're American, and then they're totally anti-American with what they want to put in place. So what do you think about that? How do you play both sides of this as we're heading towards November 3rd?
Well, that's what the Democrats are known for, is playing both sides of everything, because if they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. And so that's, of course, the Democrats' playbook. And it really struck me, as a constitutional law attorney, as someone who absolutely loves the Constitution. And, President Trump and I have had many conversations about his love of the Constitution and about how much he loves America. That's so evident, even in the video that you played, coming in to this segment with the boaters and, everything that he would be out there holding and waving that flag. He just loves America so much. And yet the Democrats are showing that they don't have the first clue about the genuine principles that America was founded upon. They're saying, that they're somehow for the Constitution. They don't even know what that means. Joe Biden couldn't even quote the Declaration of Independence a couple of months ago on the campaign trail. So they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. They're making up their principles as they go along, and they're just the principles of the moment when it works for them.
Yeah, it's hard to cast yourself as a centrist and a socialist, kind of all in the same deal. So speaking of the Constitution, and I was eager to have you on as a constitutional attorney. I played a clip last night on this show of Joe Biden. Within the span of 45 seconds, a CBS reporter asked him about, this was a couple months ago, asked him about a mask mandate, which he originally said when he was first asked a question, his immediate reaction was, oh, no, you can't do that from a federal level. And then 30 seconds later, the reporter says to him, so you'd use your federal power? And he says, oh, yes, of course I would, which is now you've heard him come out and say, we're going to mandate. Where does Joe think he's getting that power from in the Constitution that you so well know? And where is he getting this from?
Probably the same place that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer think that they have constitutional authority for all of the things they're trying to do. It's within the lines of the Constitution that, they try to read between the lines, and they try to then pull out powers that aren't actually granted. And they want to just say whatever they think. And clearly, Joe Biden would not have the federal power to implement that kind of mandate. And, contrast that with what President Trump has done by providing the resources and recommendations recommendations from the federal level to the states and the state and local leadership to implement them according to best practices and according to, of course, the police powers. And we're seeing that overreach in Democrat-led states, and we're seeing why it's so important on November 3rd, not only to vote for President Trump for 4 more years, but to make sure that you vote all the way down ticket so that you don't have these tyrannical local leaders. But Joe Biden doesn't have the first clue about federalism and how that works.
Yeah. So let's turn to mail-in voting versus absentee voting, if you have a second on that, because it feels to me, and we continue to talk on this show, how the Democrats are always looking for what's the new shiny object going to be. Russia. Dr. Bandy Lee, going back to a long time, she was the new shiny. They're always looking for something. And now that the Russia thing's kind of fallen apart, and now we have indictments starting to come from John Durham, now it seems like they've turned their attention to the post office. This is going to be the new shiny object of the month, week, however long it lasts. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I thought it was really incredible and very brilliant of the Postmaster General to come out yesterday and say that even though there are always these protocols, and anyone who's running a federal department is always looking for the best way to implement their goals, and yet he was saying just for any appearance that any of these protocols would impact or influence the November election, he's going to suspend any implementation of any protocols until after the election. And my first thought was, well, are Democrats in the states going to do the same thing? What about states like Nevada that passed a very hastily passed bill out of their legislature that was signed by the governor to implement universal vote by mail? And then just this weekend, the New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, signed an executive order that is changing their entire election law to universal vote by mail. And Team Trump just filed a lawsuit late last night to target that and evidence how it is unconstitutional. And so if you look at what the Democrats are trying to do, their shining object is somehow mailboxes, and yet they don't realize that the American people we all own our own mailbox too. I mean, even in an apartment you have your own mailbox, so that's not really a thing. But they are trying to implement universal vote by mail through foreclosing our access to the franchise as voters. And they are trying to remove election safeguards and protections, and they are trying to affect the election. And so unlike the Postmaster General, unlike the Team Trump, and unlike President Trump, who wants to make sure to protect the vote for every American, regardless of how they vote, protect our voice, the Democrats are trying intentionally to remove safeguards and make our elections less safe, less fair, less free, less secure.
Yeah, I mean, somehow the idea that this is some argument that has no basis in fact is just out. I mean, we've just in a simple Google search, you can find story after story after story. We played on a show here, a local CBS Philly local news reporter mailed 100 ballots and then 100 fake ballots to the same address to see what would show up. And he had all kinds of problems. Went to the post office. They couldn't find it. It was so bad he finally had to reveal to the post office what he was doing, that he was a television reporter, and what he had done for them to actually go find the actual ballots, which all weren't even there in the first place. So the idea that somehow this, it's not our job to prove that the system has never had tens of millions of this kind of voting. It's worked on a very small level in certain places. But the idea that this is some argument that's not based in fact is crazy.
Yeah, we have so many different examples of how this is going to just create absolute chaos in the system. And so we do have absentee, which is available in all 50 states for people. If they can't, for whatever reason, get to the poll and vote in person, then they have the absentee process. And it does have safeguards and security protections, but that's not the best way to vote if you can get there in person. But, for example, like President Trump, he's in Washington, D.C. His residence now is Florida. He's going to have to vote absentee. And so that's fine, but that's not the best practice. And so to think that you can just change the entire election system and upend it, less than 90 days before a national presidential election is just intentionally trying to create chaos.
Yeah. You know, as a constitutional attorney, I'm sure you're concerned at what you're seeing from these governors, and it just happens to be that they're all blue state governors and mayors. And you look at New York City, 64 diagnosed cases of COVID-19 yesterday in a city of 1.6 million, 0 deaths. And the mayor there, who might be the worst public official ever elected to office, still is unwilling to open up the city. This has got to be concerning. What do the numbers have to be in New York to get, you start to think, well, this is really looking political.
Absolutely. And it looked political, and it was obvious during the George Floyd protests when, Democrat led officials and state officials were actually supporting that and encouraging that without any sort of health and safety orders that were being enforced, when it was a viewpoint that politically somehow they agreed with. But then when it's politically expedient for them to continue this justification that somehow there's a state of emergency, then they're trying to enforce that and keep the schools closed, keep churches closed, keep businesses closed, and then justify the universal vote by mail. And that's what is so frustrating to the American people. We all see through that. We see that there is no state of emergency similar to what it was in March and April. It's just not there. And this, though, for the Democrats, they have to keep the state of emergency going, and they want to completely ignore the data so that they can justify their universal vote by mail. Because if they don't have the emergency, they can't justify it. And that is absolutely despicable, that they are trying to harness the coronavirus as a pretext just to remove safeguards from our election system. We are a system of government that gets to select and prefer who is in office. We are citizen-led. We get to select and prefer our leaders. And for the Democrats to be removing safeguards intentionally is just, it's what the president calls it, rigged all the time. And he says that, and that's what he means, is that the Democrats are intentionally trying to confuse the issue.
Yeah. I've only got about 30 seconds left here. As we head to November 3rd, I say the president continues to make the case between, this is a choice between liberty and tyranny, not necessarily even a choice between Biden and Trump. It's really a decision how you want to live your life, how you want your kids to live your life. I think that's the case he has to make. What do you think?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what this is about, is we select and prefer the best person in a closed universe. I mean, you have two options here. The best person who understands that our system of government preserves and protects our unalienable rights that come from God, our creator. That is the premise of American government. President Trump has proved that. He's proved that over and over the last 4 years with all of his accomplishments.
Yeah.
The Democrats are intending to destroy America and take away our rights.
Well,
there is no other option but President Trump and America.
Well, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you very much. We hope I can have you back on again.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Jenna Ellis here, live from Studio 6B. Stay with us if you're on social media. If you're watching on Dish Network, Pluto TV, we're back. 3 minutes.